Trevor, welcome into the game in Tuscaloosa. I hope all is well, man.
Everything is great. I appreciate you having me, man. I'm excited to talk to you.
Well, now, this is the land of John Hannah, Brad Edwards. I mean, Tuscaloosa is kind of, like those are people that I know that you're connected with. That you had a chance to play with John, right? Did you play with him one year in New England?
I did. Actually, Brad Edwards, who's a kicker,
sure,
and John Hannah, who's a Hall of Fame offensive lineman, are kind of the same, only different. And I did. My rookie year, John Hannah was in, I believe, his final year, one of his last two, certainly, at New England. And I was not capable of understanding him. He was the ultimate old-school tough guy. And I was a guy that came out of BYU that was all about technique and quickness and flash. And John, I just couldn't understand him. On game day, he would sit by himself on the bench when the defense was on the field. And I figured out that that's because everybody was pretty much scared to death of him. So when his helmet was a couple of sizes too small because he'd taken the pads out and replaced them with the thinnest pads possible. So his helmet was almost like just another version of his skin because he didn't want it there at all. And he would go out on the field, literally beat red when he was furious, and he was furious on the field, and physically beat to a powdered pulp anybody that had the misfortune to stand in his way. And I'll tell you, later on in my career, I started to understand some of the things that he did and some of the advice that he gave me. But that first year, I was not capable to begin to fathom it.
Well, and John, you could really make the argument. I mean, certainly Derek Thomas, Leroy Jordan, many others, but one of the best offensive linemen of all time. I think Sports Illustrated sort of gave him that title, but he may be the greatest Alabama player to ever wear the jersey. I mean, he is one of historic players here in Tuscaloosa. We love John, and he's up in Holly Pond, Alabama. He's a cattle farmer now. I don't know if you've had a chance to connect with John lately, but John's got in the cattle business up in Holly Pond, Alabama.
You know what? I would love to on my travels, because I do travel the country with my job with ESPN. I would love to pop in and say hello, just to thank him for how he helped my career, even though at the time he didn't realize it because I didn't seem to connect with anything. So I'd love to stop in and have a conversation with him now.
Absolutely. And Trevor, I want to look and just kind of ask you before we get things started, when you look at Alabama and Nick Saban, what has allowed Coach Saban to have this so much success? I mean, we love to get the people that are from outside of Tuscaloosa to kind of help us understand how Nick Saban has won 141 games and only 21 losses in 12 years.
You know what? I'll give you two things. One of them he told me, and one of them is my observation. On my travels a couple of years ago, I visited with him in his office for about a half an hour. And one of the questions I asked Coach Saban was, what do people not know about the foundation of the success of what amounts to this Fortune 500 corporation that is Alabama football? And I expected him to tell me something to the effect of, you have to have the right people. You have to pull in the same direction. Just all the basic stuff like that. Instead, he didn't miss a beat. And he said, Trevor, the key to our success is that everybody in this organization, from the head coach down to the groundskeeper and everybody in between, has as their primary mission to maximize the opportunity for the student athletes on the field so they can have the best opportunity for success as players, and off the field so that when they leave Alabama, they'll have the best opportunity in life. And everything else is built on that foundation. What he's saying is that talented football players are mildly interesting. If you can develop their character and develop them as young men, you'll be able to coach them better. They'll respond at a higher level, and everything works better. So that's what he told me. My observation is that the recruiting that they do is only part of the process, because when you get 18-year-old unguided missile superstars out of high school that think that they're all that, and put them into a situation where everybody wants the football, everybody wants the spotlight, everybody wants the interview, how do you keep them focused on the team? How do you get them to subordinate that ego to the good of the team? And one of the things that Nick Saban is a master at is not just developing the talents of those players on the field, but also managing the egos in a way that everything fits together.
It's a great answer. Great answer. And it's always kind of fun to be able to study this dynasty and the conversation and the work ethic and what Nick Saban's been able to do. Where do you want to see Tua Tagovailoa take that next step as a quarterback?
I want to see him take the next step mentally. We know that when things go well, he is as good as there is in college football. I mean, he's slinging the ball. He's got time to throw. The running game's working. Play action is working. All those things are good. I think the Clemson game exposed some opportunities for him to get better this year. Clemson got into his head and did some things that he might not have been expecting that led to those 2 early interceptions at the national championship game in January. And he still went on to throw for 295 yards in 3 quarters, but he wasn't his usual self. And so I think what he is likely working on will include pausing a beat to confirm that what he thinks will happen pre-snap is what actually happens once the snap is made and the defense jumps out of their disguise into the true coverage. And I'm sure that he's working on that. And the truth of it is he's only had 1 year as a starter. And so the fact that he's been able to accomplish what he has is borderline astonishing. But I think that he's got ways to improve from a standpoint of the craft of quarterbacking as it applies to the craft of applying the mental notes. He's got the intellectual horsepower to do it. He just, the experience is something that just comes with experience. And I think that's what they're working on to get him to the next level.
Trevor, each and every day we talk 4 hours of Alabama football, 5 days a week. That's all we talk about, 52 weeks out of the year. I mean, we've counted it down from 240 days, and we're down to 107, and we feel like we've crossed over the backside of the mountain. If Alabama's not in New Orleans playing for a national title, what will keep them from accomplishing that?
What will keep them to accomplish that is a pass defense that can't put a speed bump in front of Clemson. Because right now, on paper, it looks like Clemson and Alabama are the most likely 2 teams to be there. If Alabama's not there, or if they face Clemson and they lose, it will be because they won't be able to stop that opposing passing attack. And there's a couple of things. One of them is the pass rush, and the other is the secondary. I mean, this past season, I actually did a breakdown on SportsCenter early in the season about how the secondary busted coverages. And that's really weird because that rarely happens at Alabama, but I think they had enough guys that were young in the position that things kind of broke down. Then what happened was, as the season wore on, the leadership on the field got injured. Some of the top guys that were the leaders weren't on the field to kind of grab those younger guys when things went wrong and kind of shake them and say, hey, we can do this. This is what you got to do, and refocus them on the task at hand. And I think that's one of the things that the Bama defense struggled with against that Clemson passing attack. So really when it comes down to it, defense is about standing in the right place and looking at the right guy. And at Alabama, it's harder to do that than it is at many schools because of the complexity of the defense that's there. When it works, it is a thing of beauty. But if guys get hurt, if leadership gets hurt especially, then it makes it a little bit more challenging for those guys. And if they don't make it back, I think that's the reason it will be.
We're talking with Trevor Matich right now, ESPN college football analyst. I got to give credit back to the website, ESPN.com. It's got 100 things that you must know about college football. And I think one of the notes, number 11, was Alabama and Clemson have combined to win 11 of the past 12 college football games. Clemson and Alabama, 11 out of 12. Is it good for college football that you got these 2 heavyweights that are the dominant teams right now?
Absolutely. Oh, it's awesome. This is a country that loves greatness, or at least they should.
Sure.
And I love the idea that there are heavyweight titans out there colliding with each other. The fun as a fan of seeing 2 of the greatest programs at the height of their powers in the history of the game collide year after year for the national championship is just epic. But what it also does is it forces everybody else to elevate their own game. And you see that happening certainly in the SEC as the coaching staffs continue to become higher paid and higher quality, et cetera. And it just makes everybody elevate. And it'll take them a while to get to where Clemson and Alabama are. But remember this, that Alabama, when Nick Saban took over, was a fairly mediocre program at the time. I mean, not in their history, but at the time they were no great shakes. Clemson, when Dabo Swinney took over, was no great shakes. And both of those coaches built those programs into the dynasties that they are now. And there's no reason why other programs can't do the same thing. And with the standard set so high, everybody needs to elevate. And I think it's fantastic that there are two that are setting the standard. And if they're the ones that collide at the end, I can't wait.
Trevor, who's the second best team in the ACC?
Probably Miami right now. Miami on offense has a lot of questions to answer, especially at quarterback. With Tate Martell transferring in from Ohio State, they seem to have a guy that certainly has the talent on paper. We'll see if he can get it done on the field. Their skill positions are phenomenal at Miami. But their defense is getting back into the form that we're accustomed to from a standpoint of attitude, if not full top-to-bottom talent, of the Hurricane defenses of the 80s, when they just, in 90s, when they were just talking trash and crushing people and living behind the line. And that's what Manny Diaz, their new head coach, he was the defensive coordinator there before being elevated to the head coach this year. That's what he brought back. I mean, the last couple of years, that Miami defense was behind the line, just shredding quarterbacks and running backs before they could get started. And this year, Miami brings back the most experienced and talented trio of starting linebackers in all of college football. All three guys have been starting since their freshman year together, true freshman year. They all three could have gone off to the NFL, but they all stayed because they take very seriously the responsibility that they have to the U and to the legacy of those players that went before them, who then went on to the NFL and became Hall of Famers there. And those three guys will be a joy to watch.
Trevor, if it's not Alabama, Clemson, who gets your most attention maybe as that next team that you think might be a part of the conversation in New Orleans?
That's a great question. And right now it would kind of be a guess, because I could point to flaws in teams and reasons why they won't be there just as well as I could point to reasons why they will. You look at Oklahoma. Oklahoma lost a lot on offense. They lost their second consecutive Heisman-winning quarterback, who became the first pick in the draft 2 years in a row. But now they've got your guy, Jalen Hurts, and I was out in Lincoln Riley's office, the head coach of Oklahoma, just a few weeks ago, and he told me that the arm talent that Jalen Hurts has displayed is plenty good enough to run the offense. Now, they'll probably throw in a bunch more running as well, but the arm was what was interesting to me, and Lincoln Riley says that he can get this thing done, and I think a good part of that is a result of Jalen Hurts staying in Alabama last season. For the first time in his career in Tuscaloosa, he had a dedicated quarterback coach. Before that, it was the quarterback coach was also calling the plays and running the offense, and so the time and attention was divided. But he had Dan Enos last year, and you could see improvement in him. As a matter of fact, in that Georgia SEC championship game, when Tua had to go out with injury, with Alabama trailing late in the game, and in comes Jalen cold off the bench. And in that game-winning touchdown drive, he made a couple of throws that if it were Tua, we'd be gushing over how awesome Tua was on that throw, or on that decision, or on that poise. And Jalen, so he's improved. So I think that the skill people of Oklahoma will be good enough to get back. Their offensive line should be able to reload. The defense is the big question then. And really, the last couple of years, Oklahoma's defense has squandered some of the greatest offenses in college football history, certainly in recent memory. But this year, they brought in Alex Grinch to be the coordinator. He was the former coordinator at Washington State and then Ohio State. And he does things, and I've talked to him at length as well, going back to Washington State. He does things that'll make that defense better from the beginning. And they don't have to be good. All the Oklahoma defense has to do is improve from heinous to decent. And then on the strength of the offense, they should be another threat to get to the playoff and then get to the championship game.
Final question, Trevor. We love college football history. We love to hear the old stories of players. We don't really have a chance to feature a lot of people from BYU. Can you kind of give us a story, maybe a life lesson that LaVell Edwards taught you? I mean, something that you use daily to kind of connect us with that college football history that we love here in T-Town?
Yeah, I will, and I appreciate you asking that. BYU is, it's a school that's affiliated with the LDS Church, and because of that, there's an honor code that reflects the moral view of the LDS Church. And a lot of people say that that limits their ability to succeed at football. But they don't think so, because they recruit to it. They are looking for players who actually want to live their college experience with that kind of a code. And so those kinds of kids are very coachable. They're very mature, and they have their eyes elevated above things that maybe some other people, would be looking at. And so the concept of the character of the player at BYU is a very, very important part of what they do in order to maximize their football on the field. And the funny thing is, when BYU was playing Oklahoma in the season opener in Dallas at the Cowboys Stadium a few years ago, Sam Bradford was the quarterback for Oklahoma. Oklahoma was supposed to blow BYU out, and Oklahoma started to try to bully BYU around. But BYU won that game. And what ended up happening was those clean-cut, Christian, returned missionary, married, church-going BYU Cougars got into an ugly street fight with the mighty Oklahoma Sooners, smashed them in the mouth, and beat them. And then they smiled and were very polite after the game. And I think that's BYU. LaVell Edwards, you talk about our coach. He's one of the greatest coaches in the history of the game. And I think the biggest thing that he taught was that you need to be a man and you're responsible for it. And some coaches you obey because you fear them. You follow LaVell's standards because you feared losing his respect. And I think that was a very powerful way for him to lead. And I think it built a lot of men coming out of that program. And I just feel very appreciative that I was able to be a part of it.
Well, and the small college football world that we live in, that Sark is the offensive coordinator here, which is a lot of the LaVell Edwards philosophy of developing offensive schemes. And it's kind of fun to see that small little fraternity of college football. Even though it's a big, big world, it's kind of a unique little fraternity. And Sark and tying back to Alabama, it's kind of fun to kind of study LaVell Edwards. Thank you for sharing that story, Trevor. Thank you again for being a part of our show in Tuscaloosa. We love college football, and we appreciate those who are passionate like you are about the game that we love here in T-Town. Thank you again.
Thank you, and I appreciate